I'm going to walk you through how I built a miniature version of this doorway. This is a older, probably early 20th century type doorway you might see in a lot of middle-class neighborhoods. The left and right sides of the door and those curtains in the back give it a nice elegant look. So let's take a look at how it comes together. The first thing I did was measure a frame up and kind of scuff it up a little bit. Then I started building a box that goes behind the frame and will pretty much contain everything. The first actual piece that came together was the doorway. The left and right halves were pretty basic, just rectangles. And then I cut one piece of glass to fit across the back of the doorway, so it covers both sides. I used some cove molding strips to make a nice seamless transition into the windows, and then used some wood filler to cover up those gaps that remained. And then I painted the first coat of brown onto the doorway. And setting that aside to dry, turned my attention to the mailbox. Mailbox had a detailed emblem in front, which I made out of cardstock. And paint that whole thing black. Looks good spacing wise. With the paint dry in the doorway, I eased it off the glass. Little cracks and crevices here and there. With most of the doorway complete and the dimensions looking good, it was time to make some trim strips for the top and the side. And of course, the curtains behind the window using tissue paper. This was glued onto the back using the ridge along the top and bottoms of the doorways. With the curtains attached, now I could attach the doorway to the box itself. Here's a couple of spacer sticks. Looks good right there. When the doorway was glued into the box, I put some spacers around the edges. What the spacers are for is to keep the side and the top panels sort of raised a little bit. That gives the impression that the doorway is set within the wall a little bit. And then there's the trim strips to go along the doorway edges. I used a few drops of matte medium to get rid of those shiny glue spots. The outside of this building probably had asphalt shakes. It was commonly used in older buildings in certain parts of the country, and what I used is a corrugated paper, covered it with a white enamel, and then cut that into sections to use as shakes. Put those on one by one from the bottom. Now for some other door details. These are the brass kick panels that were on the bottom of each side of the door. For these I used styrene and cut it into sections and then primed it and covered in brass paint. These are various pieces I used for the doorknob and the lock, also covered in brass. I used my junk drawer. I never throw anything away. I found a little piece of something that I took apart and thought might work for a door handle. After a little paint and some fooling around with some glue and some styles, it looked the part. And once that was put in place, most of the door pretty much came together at that point. We had the kick panels, the door lock, the main handle. The bottom of the mailbox had a couple little curved metal things to hold the daily newspaper. So I made those out of styrene covered in black paint. And the doorbell. I used some cove glued together in a couple different orientations to make the trim pieces for the bottom of each window. And then some final trimming, baseboards for the outside, a couple trim strips, and the lettering, which I did by hand with a 0.5mm fine liner. And with that, the entrance is pretty well done. Then it was time to put the glass in the frame. I always secure these with a black interior strip along all the edges. See how the frame looks in place, matches up pretty well. So now it's off to get personalized. I was pretty happy with the way it came out. I think I would have done a couple things maybe a little differently, but that's true for just about every project I've ever worked on. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe.